All right, welcome back, everyone. So, you might have seen the news. There's a new variant of COVID-19 spreading. This new variant comes from South Africa. Is called the Omicron variant. Technically, it's the She variant, but they've skipped the naming conventions because they don't want to. It seems anger the Chinese Communist Party by calling it She, as in Xi Jinping. And so this She virus, aka the Omicron virus, of course, beginning now in South Africa, we have different countries now talking about lockdowns again. In the United States, Dr. Fauci, some of the original articles actually did say that they were considering lockdowns. Actually interesting, and I'll show you tonight. Reuters changed its headline, and even the archives, I couldn't even find the archives. It seems that they, at least maybe someone didn't save them, which is very rare, or someone may have changed it. I'll be showing you this tonight, be going into this, also showing you what other governments are planning on doing because a lot's happening right now. Australia is, of course, putting people in quarantine camps now, at least in some areas. They're also talking about expanding that to other countries like Germany. Germany is now talking very seriously about the possibility of things like this. Israel is pioneering new technologies in terms of dealing with lockdowns, including using counter-terrorism phone tracking technology as a social control system to, track the virus. Just when we all thought it was over, folks, not only does it continue, but it gets a bit more authoritarian. And I'll be detailing some of the policies that we've seen rolling out with this and some of the discussions with it. Also, at the same time, there's some new data on natural immunity, which says what many of you might suspect. And I'll be detailing that tonight as well, because it's quite interesting and also quite useful in terms of kind of calming the craziness right now. All right, folks, always a lot to talk about. That said, it's good seeing y'all here. As always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. Around the halfway point, we'll go into them. Also, hope y'all had a good Thanksgiving. I know we didn't do the Thanksgiving episode. Hope y'all had a nice day with your families. American Misfit, you said the Soyance? No. After Shadow 162, you said it's a smoke screen. It's starting to look that way at the very least. But we'll see what happens. Maybe these variants are real. The real concern with Omicron, based on what we're seeing, isn't really belief that it may actually be deadly. All the information coming from South Africa suggests it is not. The big concern is that they're seeing multiple mutations within it. And so it's the mutations that apparently are making people concerned. But, I'll detail it tonight. We'll go over what we know. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into the first story. And again, around the halfway point, we're going to questions. So if you have questions, leave them in the chat. All right, so first off here, it says this. U.S. should be prepared to do anything, including lockdowns, to fight Omicron, according to Fauci. Now, it's interesting because I had to look for this original article. This is the original Reuters headline. Presumably, they changed it. They changed it. The new headline says U.S. readies fight against Omicron, but too soon for lockdown. Sorry, it says Fauci too soon for COVID-19 lockdowns over the Omicron variant. No, I'm sorry. The new Reuters headline says U.S. readies fight against Omicron, but too soon for lockdowns. Whereas the original headline said prepared to do anything, including lockdowns. As I mentioned, this is a Reuters story that was doing rounds. Of course, Reuters is a service different media outlets can get, and so they can publish their articles. What you're looking at is the original headline before they changed it. And you'll be surprised that I actually had to look around for it because even the archives of the original Reuters article are no longer available. Not only did they change the headline, but they erased the history of it. It's crazy. Ironically, though, in the articles that did publish it, including most major media that did publish the Reuters article, you can actually still look at the URL because the URL still has the old headline. But let me tell you what it says, and we'll go into it a bit more. It says here, Americans should be prepared. This is the article. It says, Americans should be prepared to fight the spread of the new COVID-19 variant Omicron, but it is too soon to say what actions are needed, including possible mandates or lockdowns. This is the original article. Hear that, folks? Including possible mandates or lockdowns. Top U.S. infectious disease official Dr. Anthony Fauci said on Sunday. It says here, the United States must do anything and everything. And that's Fauci's actual quote is anything and everything amid the likely cause of the variant, but it is, quote, too early to say, quote, and it says whether we need new lockdowns or mandates. Fauci told ABC News this as well. You want to be prepared to do anything and everything. Now, presumably the reason they changed the headline and rewrote the story a bit, and did it in a way that it's quite strange, to be honest, is because Fauci did not directly say possible mandates or lockdowns. He said anything, which could be interpreted as mandates or lockdowns, or maybe even COVID camp, like Australia and like Germany's talking about right now. Anything, right? Again, they changed that though, right? Fauci's exact words were anything and everything. And again, we'll see what happens with it because we're at the very beginning of this. Now, not suggesting why Australia might have changed, why Reuters may have changed its headline, but presumably it's because Fauci did not exactly say they're considering lockdowns. He said anything and everything is being considered, essentially. At the same time, folks, let me show you another story because this one also came out shortly after this. This is Epoch Times reporting that Fauci is saying it's too soon now. He's saying too soon for COVID-19 lockdowns over the Omicron variant. And I won't go into all this, but he said this. It says, during an ABC News interview, Fauci said the United States must do again anything and everything to curb cases of the variant. Although it is too early to say, that's his quote, too early to say, quote, and then it says whether we need new lockdowns or vaccine mandates. We'll see what happens, folks. And we'll see as well whether it's lockdowns and vaccine, whether it's lockdowns particularly for the unvaccinated, because as information is now suggesting, it's not confirmed yet. Information is suggesting that this new Omicron variant is somehow immune, bypasses the vaccines. Pfizer's saying within about 100 days, they plan on having a new vaccine out that they believe can cover it. But if Omicron is the new variant that's spreading, and if it is in fact able to bypass vaccines, remember that he said the same thing about the Delta variant, and then they kind of swept it under the rug and pretend it never happened. Remember that? We'll see if they still mandate the vaccine if the vaccine is shown to be ineffective against it, because right now it seems that that's the case, and that's what's being reported. Pfizer, again, has said within 100 days, they plan to have a vaccine that can cover it, suggesting the current one does not cover it, but we'll see. This also brings us, ironically, back to square one. Back to square one, where possibly lockdowns, possibly anything and everything is being considered to deal with the spread of a new virus, because that's what's happening. Possibly anything and everything being used to stop the spread of a new virus as we wait 100 days for the new vaccine to come out. And then maybe we'll be back where we were maybe a couple weeks ago, where, again, it's vaccine mandates again and so on. Again, we're at the beginning of this, so we don't quite know how it's going to be developing, but I want to show you some different headlines in a bit, because already you have countries really taking pretty extreme measures to deal with it, including Australia, including Israel, including other countries that are taking really kind of extreme measures, and also discussing very extreme measures as a way to prevent the spread of this new variant. And again, essentially, the new variant is being treated as if it were a new disease altogether in terms of, our inability to do anything about it, it seems, and also the way it's heading. I'll be detailing this in just a bit, folks. First of all, again, as I mentioned before, we are demonetized by YouTube. You know, one of the reasons we can keep the show going is, again, because of all of your support on Epic TV, and also thanks to our sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by Secure. Over 155 million Americans were affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data and activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secure. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland. Why Switzerland? It's because Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the world, something becoming ever more important, folks. Secure is also the only private and secure email and messaging app that does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. Also very important, because that means it's also not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act, which pretty much any US technology would be subject to. Secure does not ask for your phone number, it does not mine your data, and it does not upload your contacts like all other applications of this type tend to do. Secure Messenger functions by adding people that you know and in adding their secure numbers. You can still chat with non-secure users as well by sending them an invite. In this way, you're protected from hackers getting onto your phone and you have full privacy while on the app. Now, it's $5 for the Messenger and only $10 for the email and Messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And folks, big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode. All right, now that said, as we've been discussing, essentially we're back at square one with dealing with this virus. A new virus essentially is spreading, one that there appears to be no way of defending against based on current data. Again, we don't quite know yet. Pfizer is saying within 100 days we may have a vaccine, which means, bit over 3 months essentially. Bit over 3 months before things are figured out. Things are able to be protected against, meaning, well, governments now get 3 months to prepare for whatever situation might happen until that time comes about and until they may decide whether to mandate a new vaccine, the one that protects us against Omicron and or whatever variants we may see between now and then. And again, Fauci is not saying they're doing anything yet. He's saying we'll have to see. He's saying anything and everything is being considered, but different states in the United States and also different countries around the world are already putting these measures into place. Already now we see governments, whether in the international level, Australia, Germany considering it, Israel doing very strong measures. We're also seeing states in the U.S. doing it, such as New York. And in New York, the governor has now declared a state of emergency to prepare for Omicron, based, again, on these initial reports coming out. It says this according to The Hill. It says New York Governor Kathy Hochul, a Democrat, declared a state of emergency to prepare for a new coronavirus variant that first identified in South Africa. Hochul's declaration on Friday is one of the first emergency steps by a state in the U.S., and again, we'll have to see if others follow, against the new variant known as Omicron. Technically, it's the she variant, but they changed it. I'll explain it. Whose discovery was announced Thursday. The nation's top infectious disease expert, everyone's favorite doctor, Anthony Fauci, said in an interview on Friday that with CNN that there have been no Omicron cases detected in the United States. No cases in the U.S., folks. Although he acknowledged that does not rule out the possibility the variant could be in the country. Could be here, we just don't know yet, in other words. And it says this is according to Hochul, quote, "We continue to see warning signs of spikes in COVID this winter," because it's flu season. She didn't say that, but it's flu season, right? "We continue to see warning signs of spikes in COVID this winter, and while the new Omicron variant has yet to be detected in New York State, it's coming," Hochul said in a tweet. Now, I won't go over this whole article, but a bit further down just to detail what this executive order is. In effect, currently, it's going to last until January 15th, at least in its current form. And it allows non-essential procedures, whatever that would encompass, non-essential procedures to be postponed in hospitals in order to increase hospital capacity. Ironically, you had one emergency room in New York get shut down because, again, they don't have enough nurses because of the vaccine mandates, ironically. But state of emergency in order to increase hospital capacity. Hochul is urging residents to wear a mask, get vaccinated, and get a booster shot to combat the new variant. Although, again, as we've noted, based on early reports, it doesn't seem these protect against the new variant anyways. And Pfizer is saying they need 100 days to develop one that can. Here we are again, folks. Quick note, too, I'll go into a few more issues we've seen abroad. Biden has shut down travel from South Africa to the U.S. and I believe other parts of Africa as well. You already have cases of this virus being seen in other countries. And while Biden has shut down travel from South Africa, he has kept open the southern border when we're getting many South African or African migrants, including many from different countries. Again, I'm going to be detailing some of what we're seeing coming out of there as well. A future episode, you have to wait for it still because I'm still writing it. At the same time, folks, already we see other countries taking extremely new levels of strong measures with this. And this is Israel right here. It's saying that in Israel, they're going to shut borders to all foreigners. They're also using a phone tracking technology designed, ironically, for counterterrorism operations over the Omicron COVID-19 variant. In other words, we already see states in the U.S. and countries changing policies based on just this emerging news that we just now got recently about this new variant. And it says this: Israel on Saturday unveiled new plans to ban all foreigners into the country, a world first in efforts to curb the spread of the newly detected COVID-19 variant called Omicron. The nation has also revealed plans to use counter-terrorism phone tracking technology to surveil the new variant's spread. Now, I don't know what tracking people's phones using counter-terrorism technology has to do with tracking a virus, unless the virus is somehow carrying a cell phone. But this is interesting. Who knows what this new counter-terrorism phone tracking technology does and how it's able to detect the spread of viruses, but they're activating it now somehow to surveil the new variant spread. We don't yet know what that means, but we'll see. Again, that's in Israel. We see similar things in other countries, not against the vaccine, not against the virus, but against things like the Biden administration, for example, targeting parents using counterterrorism technologies as we go forward. We'll see where this goes. At the same time, now, Germany may be moving on this next. Now, Germany, as we mentioned, has been really kind of on the front lines of countries outside of Australia discussing the possible use of COVID camps, where people are being forcibly removed from their homes and put into these camps. People have been talking about the possibility of this for a long time. In Australia, it's now a reality. In Germany, now they were talking about this, but it's been an argument among their politicians. You kind of have both sides arguing about it. It looked for a bit like it was not going to happen, but now with this new Omicron variant, it might. And this is a new article from one of the local media there. It says German health minister calls for massive contact restrictions to fight COVID. It says German health minister Jens Spahn has urged the incoming government to take drastic measures after more than 76,000 new COVID infections were reported within a day, saying the situation was more serious than any other time in the pandemic, and continued stating, the situation is dramatically serious. And he continued also stating, more serious than at any other time in this pandemic. Now, again, they're not mentioning Omicron directly here. They're suggesting there's 76,000 new COVID reports within one day. And again, they've been discussing for a while whether this would justify doing what's already being done in Australia, which is, again, these COVID camps. We'll see if that happens. But now they have some ammunition, so to speak, through which to launch it. Again, Hegelian dialectics, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, crisis, solution, and then outcome, essentially. Sometimes you just need a catalyst through which to launch your agenda, right? Never let a good crisis go to waste. It seems that people who might want to implement policies such as that may see an opportunity to push it now using this new narrative of the Omicron virus through which to do it. Although, again, as we mentioned, the data, there's conflicting data coming out over the variant itself and how dangerous it is. And in South Africa, where, again, you have this virus, they're basically saying there's nothing to worry about. It's not that serious. You have other people saying it's like on par with the bubonic plague. Based on what data, who knows? But that's what they're saying. I'll detail this in just a bit. Also, a quick update in Australia, where, again, you have COVID camp. So if you want to go to COVID camp, you know where to go. It says here, Australia woman charged after setting fire in quarantine hotel. Now, it appears this quarantine hotel is different from COVID camp. But it says this because again, some countries have it right now where they have quarantine hotels, where if you're traveling and so on, you might have to do 2 weeks of or whatever. Different, it varies country to country, but you might have to go in quarantine for like 2 weeks, for example. In Australia, at one of these quarantine hotels, you just had an issue where a woman has been charged with setting fire to one. It says here a 31-year-old woman in Australia has been charged with arson after a fire that destroyed part of a COVID-19 quarantine hotel in Cairns, Queensland. It is alleged she lit a fire under the bed in the room that she'd been sharing with 2 children on Sunday morning. More than 160 people were evacuated as fire took hold of the 11-story Pacific Hotel. No one was injured. It came as Australia confirmed 2 cases of the new coronavirus variant, which is prompting new restrictions, being Omicron. 2 cases of the variant in Australia. Now, at the same time, as we mentioned, I'll just say this briefly, just going over a few headlines. A top Australian official has now said we're transferring COVID-19 patients to quarantine camps. Keep in mind the quarantine camps, COVID camp, or whatever you want to call it, is not just for the unvaccinated. The vaccinated and unvaccinated alike, it seems, can go to COVID camp if you contract the virus. And again, other countries are considering adopting the same policies as Australia now. This is not the whole country of Australia. It appears to be in just one of the northern areas. At the same time, the World Medical Association boss is comparing the Omicron variant with Ebola. He's suggesting that this new Omicron variant is as dangerous as Ebola. Based on what data he's assessing that on, we don't know, because it's very different in South Africa, where the South African Medical Association, where they're seeing this virus, is saying the Omicron variant only causes, quote, mild disease. So how can you have the part of the world dealing with this variant telling everyone it's a very mild disease, this variant, while the World Medical Association is saying it's on par with Ebola? Now, based on the data we've seen so far, it seems that the deadliness and so on is pretty much on par with what South Africa is suggesting. One of the concerns, again, is that many people who are being infected with it, I think based on the reports I saw, do have the vaccine. Again, you've seen similar data across the board anyways, but maybe because they believe it can bypass the vaccine, they're seeing it as a more deadly thing. The real concerning issue we've seen with this, again, is more the number of mutations. The number of mutations is what appears to be concerning a lot of people. Now, I'm not trying to write off the threat of this or anything like that. I should mention that early on, one of the, doomsday scenarios that was talked about with COVID-19 wasn't really the initial outbreak. The real concern was about possible mutations going forward. The doomsday scenario would be like the virus going down to Brazil, mutating in that very diverse environment and then spreading around the world and then causing some serious pandemic. Typically, it is, in fact, the mutations that do need to be concerned about, which is maybe why they're reacting why they are. Even though, again, based on the current information, it does not appear to be that serious. But we'll see. We'll see again, because you have different governments reacting in different ways. At the same time, folks, China, the Chinese Communist Party, is behaving very strangely because, again, if you contract a virus, where do you typically go? You go to the hospital, right? If you want to be treated, you might want to go to the hospital. You might want to go to the doctor. You might want to go and get treatment. But as their way of dealing with the virus in Shanghai, they've shut down 20 major hospitals, which doesn't make sense, in my opinion. You have a virus spreading. People need to be treated for the virus. Hospital capacity in the U.S., they're talking about in New York, where they issued this executive order, right? Trying to expand hospital capacity. Typically, you want to have hospitals open and able to take large numbers of patients when you have large numbers of people getting sick. So why is it in China that as the virus is spreading, as they have new cases, they've shut down 20 major hospitals just in Shanghai? It doesn't make sense, in my opinion. Now, we'll see what happens here in the U.S. as well, because At the same time that you have the virus spreading in the US, you also have, of course, the vaccine mandates, which has caused shortages, especially of nurses, for example, which recently caused, even in New York, where you have this executive order, ironically, again caused New York to even have to shut down one of the emergency rooms. There were reports of this, and again, we'll see how far this goes. Um, Again, some very strange policy decisions, which may be actually making the issue worse in some regards, if you believe that a hospital is a good way to deal with it. Anyways, folks. Now, let me discuss something else that's very interesting, which is why we're talking about this virus and calling it Omicron instead of Xi, as in Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. Because actually, according to the real way you would do with this, the real way you would deal with the naming conventions, you would call it the Xi variant. This would be the Xi variant, as in Xi Jinping, XI. And guess why this is? Why we're calling it Omicron instead of Xi? It's because the World Health Organization decided it. The same World Health Organization, we should note, that was, again, Trump administration pulled out of the World Health Organization after giving it a very long time, right? After giving it a very long time to try to demonstrate its independence, right? After failing to demonstrate its independence from the Chinese Communist Party. Now the World Health Organization is trying to explain why it skipped Xi when naming new COVID-19 variant Omicron. And it says this: the World Health Organization, the WHO, has explained why it skipped the Greek letters nu, as in NU, and Xi, XI, in naming the new COVID-19 variant Omicron. And this is according to what they're saying here, right? According to a statement from the United Nations agency, the WHO, to the Epoch Times, issued on November 27th. It says here, this is what their statement said. It says 2 letters were skipped, nu and Xi, because nu is too easily, that's NU, is too easily confounded with new, as in NEW, and they say and Xi, XI, was not used because it is a common surname. It is a common surname, like Xi Jinping, but they're not saying it. It is a common surname, and the WHO best practices for naming new diseases. It says suggests avoiding causing offense to any cultural, social, national, regional, professional, or ethnic groups. In other words, folks, they're not calling it Xi because Xi might be the last name of somebody that may offend a certain nation. What nation that is, I don't know. Geez. We can all take wild guesses here as to why the WHO, which cannot demonstrate its independence from the Chinese Communist Party, which is led by Xi Jinping, would not want to call the virus the Xi virus, because again, it may offend some people. Anyway, take it as you will, of course, but that's what they're saying, right? All right, folks, that said, I'm going to go into some more stories in a bit. I want to talk especially about natural immunity and some of the new information coming out about this. Also, well, some of the growing risks of actual hot conflict with Russia and China and some other issues, including the U.S. saying all options are on the table in terms of dealing with Russia as Russia appears to begin threatening Ukraine. Pretty much where we've been for a while, but tensions are getting sharper. Tensions are getting hotter right now. And the situation is getting a bit more intense. I'm going to detail that in just a bit. First of all, though, folks, thank you all for watching this on Epic TV. Again, we do broadcast a show on Epic TV. So if we ever get censored fully, if they decide to pull us off, you know where to find the show. It's on Epic TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. We also have a lot of exclusives there, including some of the episodes I'm working on right now that I'm hopefully going to be able to tell you all about pretty soon. A lot of good stuff happening there, and also a lot of really interesting shows as well. Also some movies. One of the shows we have over there is called Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon. Trevor's like one of the top anti-communist experts in the world, and really good at explaining a lot of the behind-the-scenes connections with individuals and ideology, which you can look at and really kind of, I think, get a much better understanding of surface policy based on. One of his latest episodes talks about how a Soviet scam in the 1980s left New Zealand vulnerable to communist China today. And Trevor's, of course, from New Zealand. He's living in the U.S. now. But he does a really good job of connecting this to the United States in terms of showing how, well, what happened in other countries may be something we all may want to pay attention to. I'll show you a quick trailer now, what Trevor has to say, again, over on Epic TV.
For many years, Australia and New Zealand were allied with the United States in the Australia-New Zealand-United States military alliance, known as ANZUS. And it was a very deep alliance. New Zealand and Australia were both very grateful to America for saving them from Japanese invasion during World War II. And it was an alliance designed to stop Soviet expansionism and to keep the peace in the South Pacific. And to a large degree, it was pretty successful. That all changed in 1984 when a Labour Party government was elected and the new Prime Minister David Lange banned nuclear warships, nuclear armed ships from New Zealand waters and harbours. In the 1970s and 80s, New Zealand's pro-Soviet Communist Party, the Socialist Unity Party, was extremely powerful in New Zealand. They achieved this by taking over almost all of the New Zealand union movement. They controlled every major union in the country.
All right, folks, again, that's Trevor Loudon's show, Counterpunch. Be sure to check it out on Epic TV. You can find the link to Epic TV below. That's epochtv.com/Crossroads. Put the / on it because it helps us. At the same time, folks, again, that's a great way to support this channel. If you want to really go the extra mile in terms of helping Crossroads, tell a friend or family member about Epic TV. Again, that's our uncensored, independent video platform. We're getting some movies too. Yeah, we're getting a lot of like independent kind of B movies, but they're good. Give them a chance. Check them out. I think there's some good stuff there. We're also developing some of our own shows and doing a lot of our own work and really trying to keep it family friendly and doing it right. So be sure to check it out. Again, the link is in the description below. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into some more stories. Let's jump into some questions. I'm sorry. If you do have questions, leave them in the chat now. We'll try to get to them. First of all is from Linda Battleborn. Sorry. You said, "Hi, Josh. Did Francis Collins resign from his position as director of NIH back in August or not?" I believe it was Francis Collins. That was Fauci's boss resigned, if I remember right. I believe that was him. I'd have to double check, but I do believe that happened. The reason for that is, of course, anybody's guess. Who knows? Because it wasn't really quite clearly stated. And typically these days, even if someone does state a reason publicly, people tend to not really believe what they say, essentially. So it's not quite clear why he resigned, why Fauci's boss would resign. There were some strange things afoot, though. That did happen, I should note, while the NIH was being criticized pretty heavily for financing virus research in China, including, for example, different individuals proposing things such as infecting or creating human transmissible viruses and infecting bat populations with these human transmissible viruses they created. Again, chimeric viruses or gain of function through gain of function research. Gain of function, like you're adding functions, right? Adding functions to an existing virus and then releasing into the wild. Maybe it had something to do with that because that was the context in terms of controversy at the time, or maybe it had nothing to do with it. Who knows? But there, of course, the NIH was being severely questioned for its roles and its cooperation with the Chinese Communist Party in terms of doing really creepy virus research such as that, making new and dangerous viruses specifically designed to be more easily transmissible to humans. Remember, they were using mice with humanized lungs to do that, and creating mice with humanized lungs by purchasing aborted baby parts, such as severed heads and so on, as we discussed before as well. Who knows? Maybe it was related to that. Maybe he had other reasons, but that was the context at that time. Question real quick from Shannon Haney. And I saw you ask this before, and I meant to get to it. You said, question, are you aware of Holodomor Remembrance Day in Ukraine to honor those killed in the Holodomor terror famine perpetrated against Ukraine kulaks in the 1930s? Yes, folks. So in Ukraine, communism killed, I don't even know the exact number, because with a lot of these things, the numbers are not really accounted for. I believe millions, I can't remember the exact number, of people killed in this famine in Ukraine. The kulaks were what Lenin called the wealthy peasants. Technically, it's a denigrating term that was used to frame a certain part of the population as the wealthy elite who was persecuting the rest of society. Very similar to the way that BLM and critical race theory target white people these days. This part of the human race that they claim is responsible for human suffering. Every communist country, every socialist regime has always used actually almost identical narratives for that. Um, and again, under the Soviets initially, it was the kulaks, the wealthy peasants, because they were still an agrarian society. They weren't capitalist, right? They were still an agrarian society, and it was again the farmers who were a bit more successful than others who they targeted. And one of the big things that the Soviets did, as they did in China as well, was they seized farming equipment and they seized seeds. Then, as expected, you had a very large famine take place, which killed millions and millions of innocent people. Unfortunately, communism's crimes have never been never fully looked into. We had a denazification process. There was a process on exposing its crimes and getting rid of it. You had, trials. You had people hanged. That never happened with communism. And again, you're dealing with 100 million to 150 million people killed under communist regimes over the last 100 years. Well, even longer now. And counting. Interesting note as well, just briefly on this. Did anyone see the report on Wikipedia? The victims of communism page on Wikipedia that they're considering removing? Wikipedia right now as we speak, and I did check it, is talking about removing their victims of communism page, the page that details the deaths of people under communist regimes, because they're claiming, it seems, that it may go against their policies in some way. Why would exposing a regime that has killed up to, more likely, based on the numbers, around 150 million people, why would it be wrong to expose genocide? Why would it be wrong to talk about these crimes that have killed, again, upwards of 100 million, 150 million innocent people? Why would they do that? Well, you tell me. Maybe it's because opposing communism is now, for some reason, viewed as a political stance, when, ironically, the same people talking about peace and love and all these things are promoting a regime, a system that exists as a pure form of tyranny, and ironically uses slavery, state slavery in this case, denying you the fruits of your own labor, all right? Making you an asset of the state, that engages in severe abuse of women, including under both the Soviets and the Chinese Communist Party, doing forced marriages, forced rape, things like this. Why, even as we speak, a regime such as the Chinese Communist Party can have horrible sexual abuse of women who are political prisoners, including the rape of women using electric batons happening in China as we speak. Why is it that we can't talk about the evils of a system that would perpetrate crimes like this, and that has been the bane of the human existence for over 100 years? Again, causing more deaths than probably any ideology that we know of ever in history. Why can we not talk about it? Why is that considered controversial? The only reason I could say is that there are people who want it. There are people who want to see it repeated. And talking about its crimes damages their agenda. That's the only reasoning I can see with it. And unfortunately, for some weird reason, it's controversial to even talk about this. How is it controversial to oppose mass genocide, state slavery, and an ideology, again, that really does exist purely on the promotion of hatred? One of the reasons why, interestingly, the Catholic Church used to excommunicate communists, because dialectical materialism exists to sharpen the antagonisms between people, drive them into conflict, because they believe in the idea that conflict leads forward. They believe that conflict, increases the rate of social evolution, like Darwinian social evolution, right? Survival of the fittest. You increase the struggle. You make things worse. You cause famines. And then you watch the survival of the fittest. That's what it does. And again, communism exists through endless abuses like this. Yeah, here we are, folks. Another question here from D. Fritchie Q. Sorry, DFRITZSCHE. He said, Josh, is Biden the only one that can fire Fauci? I believe so. It says his well, technically, I think his higher ups could. The one who quit not too long ago, he might have been able to. You said his communication is not in sync with the White House or reality. He is causing more harm than good to the American public. What evidence does Congress need to have him locked up? Well, we'll see. I mean, technically, Congress could go after him because he may have lied before Congress when he denied that his organization was doing gain of function research. Again, you have people who lied under oath who are being dragged off to the gulag essentially right now. Pre-dawn raids at their homes. Remember that under the Trump administration? You had people who were gone after by Congress like that for, again, lying to Congress, which Fauci very likely did in fact do when he denied that they were doing gain of function research. And when it was illegal. And again, new information coming out does suggest that they were in fact doing it. Of course, it would need to go to trial. You need to see it. And we'll see how it goes. It is possible that if Republicans, for example, can retake the House of Representatives, again in the midterms which are coming up, it is possible that they may go after him. Again, you have the January 6th Commission going after people for contempt of Congress for refusing to, ironically, provide them with information they can't legally provide them with. You have people refusing to break the law and being accused of crimes for refusing to break the law, being dragged before Congress and facing criminal charges. Why not, again, the individual who lied before Congress about very controversial research, or lied in essence? Because the way he did it, backtracking a little bit, is that, again, he's basically was questioning whether his organization was doing gain of function research with the Chinese Communist Party. Yes, they were, but instead of using the phrase gain of function, they described the process. They described the definition of gain of function. It's like, for example, you do something, but instead of using the word for doing it, you just describe what it is. Essentially, is how he did it. And so, again, it would have to go to court, have to go to trial, but there's evidence on which to prosecute him if they ever choose to do so. But again, you also have statutes of limitations. So if they don't act soon, nothing will happen probably. Another question here from Cameron Bacon. He said, Josh, do I have amnesia? Or did the Democrats and communists go from claiming they didn't trust the vaccine under Trump to now backing a 100-day turnaround for a variant discovered a few days ago that somehow everyone knew about instantly? Cameron, I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, as I was reading these reports from Israel and some other countries, frankly, how do they roll out this new counter-terrorism phone tracking technology like on a whim, basically within a couple of days of having a new variant announced, if they weren't already considering doing it? If they weren't already looking into being able to do it, how would they, within a couple of days, create a new policy like that and roll it out immediately? It's possible, but the chances of it are very slim just based on how governments typically work. Suggesting, again, the different countries were very likely already planning some of these policies. They were just waiting for a catalyst. Again, Hegelian dialectic, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, crisis, solution, outcome. Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? Who said that? Remind me. That was Pelosi. Those of you wondering. So, again, it's speculation in terms of what their intentions are and how that's moving. But again, it is very strange. And on your note too, you're asking, weren't the Democrats the ones saying they wouldn't get the vaccine under Trump? That's true. Remember, Fauci was, again, in this position under Trump as well. And when Trump was rolling out the, what was it called? Operation Warp Speed policy to get the virus vaccines out quickly. It was actually Democrats who were saying they wouldn't get it. Remember, Kamala Harris herself made very strong statements suggesting she wouldn't. And so why is the sudden 180 on this? And interestingly as well, a lot of conservatives who were suggesting they might have got it before, when Trump was still president, are now saying they won't get it, for anything. And so who knows? This brings up the bigger issue of the unfortunate way that what is a virus spreading, what is of course killing people and putting people in hospitals, and actually does have pretty serious symptoms in some people. I know some people have got it and had it very bad. It's unfortunate that you do have this situation, but it's been politicized, and it's been politicized in ways that some of the policies being rolled out are not based in science. Science shows otherwise, actually, in terms of the effectiveness of some of these policies. And in some countries like Australia, if you're a doctor, you can't even legally question it without facing possible persecution, without facing possible prosecution, for that matter. It's a very strange development where they say trust the science, but can you trust the science if scientific debate isn't allowed? They say trust the experts when the experts aren't allowed to comment on it if they think otherwise. It's a very unfortunate situation, again, that it's been politicized to such a point where the politicization of it is what's causing people to doubt any of it. And ironically, probably making a situation even worse if it is something to be concerned about. Again, the politics, the state intervention is probably causing more trouble than it's meant to resolve. Typically a common situation you see with interventionist policy in general, of course. Now, the question here from Dorel Watts. He said, Josh, are you aware that people in Australia voluntarily go into the Howard Springs quarantine camp? It sounds like you believe people are being dragged there. That was just the one Aboriginal woman who chose not to stay home. Well, thank you for clarifying if that's the case. Based on the reports I saw, it seemed mixed because they were talking about, quote unquote, dragging people there essentially. I believe you had just a handful at first, but they were talking about expanding it. If it is not being forced on everybody, that's of course not as bad. But again, they did it to one Aboriginal woman so far, but we'll see. Again, who chose not to stay home, right? We'll see. Again, whether they choose to expand it, because the discussion right now is to expand the forced removal of people. But we'll see. Again, it is good to get the facts right. So as you mentioned, it's not everybody who's being forced. It seems to be mostly voluntary. Another question here from Jared Rodriguez 042311. He said, Sir, Navy says only 70 members unvaxxed. Interesting. He said, I have it on good authority there are at least 30 in one command. Is anyone out there putting them to task for either the blatant lie or convolation of actual numbers? Well, we'll have to see. Honestly, it's hard to really know how accurate any of the numbers we're seeing are these days, frankly. Honestly, even over the past year, which is why honestly I think people are kind of freaking out as much as they are, even in the original news of this virus coming out, is that the data is all over the place. Not only is the data all over the place, where you even have conflicting information coming out like all the time, even from very credible sources. And I'm doing my best to sift through it for you all here. You have conflicting data coming out all the time, and so people don't know what to believe anymore. And then the problem is when people don't know what to believe anymore, when real information does come out, they don't know if they can rely on it or not. You have people basically looking at the situation of misinformation, medical misinformation coming from authoritative sources like the World Health Organization and Dr. Fauci himself, and individuals like Dr. Fauci himself contradicting himself, saying that masks don't work and then saying you have to mandate the masks. Like the CDC, for example, coming out and saying that, again, with the vaccines, they don't stop transmission of the virus, that people who are vaccinated can transmit it, which is why they reinstated some of the mask mandates for vaccinated people. But you can't even talk about it on a lot of social media. Some social media will punish you for saying that. So again, how do you deal with a situation like this, where even between agencies, between the WHO and the CDC, information doesn't line up, the narratives aren't lining up. And then when you deal with media and social media, censoring, attacking people for questioning or even stating things like this, where debate and discussion is not even allowed based on exact information coming to us from these sources, how can you kill public debate and then expect people to believe what you're saying? This is the complicated situation we're dealing with this virus. And, briefly on that as well, that was one of the reasons why Crossroads, remember last year we did this investigative report looking into over a year now, looking into the virus origins, again, tracking the origins of the Wuhan coronavirus back when it was still called the Wuhan coronavirus. You can still find that documentary we did over a year ago on this channel if you go to our main page and just scroll down. But that was part of the purpose, was to just look at all the evidence coming out, all the noise coming out, and try to sift through it and find out what's true and what's not. And in that documentary, we found very credible evidence that this may have leaked from a laboratory in China. At the very least, that there was a huge cover-up at a laboratory in China, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the one that Fauci has been cooperating with so heavily. And again, we've seen evidence now that they intentionally quashed that story and intentionally quashed all the reports coming out on that because they didn't want their own research, gain of function research, which was illegal at that time, being discussed based on the evidence coming out now. And ironically, while Facebook, blocked or deleted my documentary over a year ago and then censored it incredibly to a frightening, over 100 million people shared it, I believe, on Facebook alone. And then everyone who shared it got an alert saying they shared false information. If I were more petty, I could have probably sued them for a lot of money for that. But 100 million people told I lied to them, basically. It turns out now that everything we've said so far holds up. And frankly, a lot of the people who said we lied have been shown to be wrong, because everything we've said so far seems to be accurate. We haven't had to correct that documentary. And we stood by it despite the attacks. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into some more stories because it's getting late and I want to talk about some more stuff. Folks, let's talk about something that we're not supposed to talk about here, but I think we need to talk about because it's important, which is natural immunity. Because new information coming out is suggesting that people with natural immunity are of little risk of infection. And you can have an antibody test to see if you need it or not. You can have an antibody test. If people are talking about actual immunity, and if governments actually cared about actual immunity, natural immunity would be considered as part of that. Why it's not is beyond me. But let's discuss what the actual data and actual research says about this. It says here, people who recovered from COVID-19 are at little risk of contracting the disease again, according to a study published this week. It says researchers in Qatar examined a cohort of over 353,000 people using national databases that contain information about patients with polymerase chain reaction confirmed infections. The studied population contracted COVID-19, the disease caused by the CCP virus, between February 28, 2020 and April 28, 2021. Reinfections were counted if a person tested positive at least 90 days after their first infection, after excluding approximately 87,500 people with a vaccination record. In other words, there's a lot of data you can look at with this. Researchers found those with immunity from having recovered from COVID-19 had little risk of infection and severe cases of the disease. In other words, not only were there few cases of reinfection, there were also few cases where the disease was actually serious in people who had the virus and then recovered from it. Previous information, previous research coming out has shown that people who have natural immunity have more robust immunity as well. Now, of these, it says just 1,304 reinfections were identified. That's 1,304 people who got the virus again after having it once out of 353,000 people. That's 0.4% of people with natural immunity and without a vaccination record getting COVID-19 a second time. The odds of severe disease were just 0.1% that at primary infection. And so the people among the people who got it, right, the odds of having it severely was 0.1%. Just 4 such cases were detected. 4 out of 353,000. No cases of death were recorded among those who got infected a second time. That's science, folks. Do we trust the science or do we trust the politicians? You tell me. Or do the politicians say that the scientists? I can't keep track. This being said, some other stories to go into. I want to talk about some of the conflicts right now with the Chinese Communist Party, with the United States, with Russia, with Japan warning about North Korea and other countries as well, because you now see a lot of different issues coming about where, well, frankly, people are talking about the possibility of a war. And it does appear to be getting more tense, but I think, frankly, there's so much going on right now that it's kind of fallen into the vat of all this intense noise everybody's dealing with. Folks, literally, while the virus was spreading, then you had like you had the military release UFO footage and nobody even cared about it because we had other stuff to care about, right? Why do we care about some dang UFOs? Like, don't got time for that right now, right? Remember that? Remember nobody cared about it? Well, folks, one of the other big issues we're facing right now, aside from the Omicron virus, is the small possibility of war with Russia and China. First off here, this is U.S. news. It says here, U.S. says all options are on the table over Russian troop buildup near Ukraine. And Russia does appear to be showing signs of possible increasing its attacks into Ukraine. It says all options are on the table in how to respond to Russia's large and unusual troop buildup near Ukraine's border. And it says, and the NATO alliance will decide on the next move following consultation next week. The State Department's top U.S. diplomat for European affairs said on Friday. A bit further into the story, it says this. U.S., NATO, and Ukrainian officials have raised the alarm in recent weeks over what they say are unusual Russian troop movements closer to Ukraine, suggesting that Moscow may be poised to launch an attack on its neighbor, accusations Russia has rejected as fear-mongering. We'll see if Russia does it or not, right? This has been going on for a long time, folks. We'll see if they do it or not, and frankly, we've seen other countries suggest that they may move in to defend them when they kind of haven't before, or to what degree they would move in to defend them, whether it's giving, for example, the people fighting them firearms, or whether it's sending some form of troops. They're saying all options are on the table, right? Now, at the same time, briefly, Ukraine's president is claiming there's a Russian-backed coup plot involving a key Ukrainian oligarch. Again, whether this is true or not, or whether it's just fear-mongering or political fear-mongering for that level, who knows? But this is what they're saying it. At the same time, folks, the Chinese Communist Party has carried out combat readiness patrols, again, using its force that would invade Taiwan, as U.S. lawmakers are visiting Taipei, Taiwan. Now, briefly on this, it's actually been interesting because I didn't see it coming. One of the big questions people had when Biden was running for president and got into office was whether he would roll back a lot of Trump's tough policies on China. He actually kept most of them and even maintained some, I'd say not the real strong trajectory Trump was on, where he was very proactive in sanctioning and going after them, but you've still seen some of it. And one of the big trends we've seen as well is that actually it's looking like the U.S. may even recognize Taiwan to a degree soon. You have congressional delegations visiting Taiwan. And there's even talk, for example, of granting Taiwan access to different international groups under UN and so on, that the Chinese Communist Party is extremely angry about. And this is happening as the Chinese Communist Party is talking about invading Taiwan and forcefully taking the country and making it part of China, much like they did to Hong Kong. A bit different again, because Hong Kong had the one country, two systems policy, where Hong Kong was able to have its own government, its own democratic system in that case. Even though it was still technically under the Chinese Communist Party, but you had rule of law, you had a court system that was based more on the British model. The Chinese Communist Party rolled in and did away with all that. Overnight, Hong Kong went from being really almost a free country to being one under the heels of the Chinese Communist Party. And the big concern was that it was Hong Kong today and Taiwan tomorrow. And Taiwan is different because Taiwan is a country. I know some people don't like hearing that. It has its own government. It's not ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. It used to be actually viewed as the official government of China because the Chinese Communist Party was seen as the unofficial government of China, which is why among Chinese they have to talk about the mandate of heaven. The Chinese Communist Party, as they say, does not have the mandate of heaven, which is why it needs to take Taiwan and overturn its government for its own legitimacy. That and the fact that it's also an example to every person living in mainland China of what the Chinese people are capable of, that with freedom they can create a harmonious and very prosperous and very good society. Taiwan being the example of that. It's a constant thorn in the side of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the CCP has been talking about taking Taiwan by force. And with this, China's military carried out combat readiness patrols in the direction of the Taiwan Strait on Friday as the U.S. congressional delegation made a surprise visit to Taipei, offering strong support for the Chinese-claimed democratically governed island. Now, I won't detail all this, but essentially, again, the Chinese Communist Party is doing a show of force, flying bombers into Taiwanese airspace and so on. At the same time, it's actually interesting that Australia and Japan even are talking about possibly defending Taiwan if something happens. And this is especially important now because the United States, Japan, India, Australia now have the Quad Alliance. Technically, they had it before, but it's different. Where, again, it's essentially a defensive alliance to an extent. It could be strengthened in a lot of ways. Trump had started it, and it was very fresh, but we see it developing. Already now, we see Japan, in Australia, especially talking about defending Taiwan, which they might if a situation were to happen. We see the U.S. showing signs it would defend Taiwan, which we'll see if it actually does, if it came down to it. And we'll have to see how India would react as well. It's quite interesting right now. As we say this, the Japanese Prime Minister is vowing to bolster defense amid China and North Korean threats. It says here, there's Epoch Times reporting, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has vowed to bolster Japan's self-defense force to cope with security threats posed by China and North Korea, renewing his pledge to consider all options, including acquiring enemy base strike capability. Remember, Japan used to have strictly a defensive military force, hence its self-defense force. Now they're talking about offense. Japan's security situation has been rapidly changing, Kishida said, at his first troop review, describing the reality as more severe than ever, citing North Korea's missile threats and China increasingly asserting its maritime activity in the region. Folks, we'll see how it goes. You do see tensions getting stronger. Whether the Chinese Communist Party would have the military ability to do something like this, we'll have to see. Whether Russia would do something like it, they're denying it, but typically in wartime, you don't tell people what you're planning to do, so we'll have to see. Briefly as well, we're not going to go into it, but the Taliban, meanwhile, after overtaking Afghanistan and siding with the Chinese Communist Party and kicking out the United States, the Taliban is now asking for international support and blaming the United States for its lack of money, ironically, and also telling the world it needs support because the Taliban doesn't seem like it's able to provide food, and Afghanistan is now facing mass starvation. It's going to be interesting to watch because, first off, Biden's going to be accused of it to some extent, I guarantee, for his rapid pullout, and which basically made the U.S. not able to continue its support in Afghanistan. At the same time, make the Chinese Communist Party look very bad, even more so because Afghanistan, the Taliban, sided with China rather than the United States. And we'll have to see how it goes. Again, huge narrative blow to the Chinese Communist Party, and probably not good for Biden either as we go into the midterms. We'll see what happens with it. At the very least, a big humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, and notably something very telling for other countries, because what they're noting is increased supply chain costs, because we have this global supply chain crisis happening right now. We have a global energy crisis as we go into winter. Even first world countries like Germany are talking about the danger of this as we go into winter, when again, you have this energy crisis. You have countries even like the Chinese Communist Party talking about possible food shortages. The biggest blow of all this is probably going to be felt in countries like Afghanistan and other third world countries that are kind of last on the list to get food and energy during times of crisis such as this. We'll see how it goes, folks. That said, I wish we could end on a happier note. Luckily, though, I do have something good for y'all. I'll show you. It's getting late, so we'll call it a night. We have a great trailer, again, on Epic TV. We also have Shen Yun Creations. Those of you not familiar with Shen Yun, it's a New York-based performing arts company. They're traditional Chinese dance and music, but not controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, the Chinese Communist Party bans them from going to China. They're not allowed to go to China because they're restoring the culture the Chinese Communist Party tried to destroy. Really incredible dance company, performing arts company. I'll show you a trailer because, again, they now have this. They now have a show on Epic TV called Shen Yun Creations, and great music, great dance. I really encourage you all to watch it, especially on something positive. All right, folks, that being said, it's always a pleasure with y'all. A real quick update for our book of the month. Again, it's The American Story by Tim Barton and David Barton. Tim Barton has agreed to do a live Q&A with us. We're going to do that on Epic TV. If you want information on that, get it in the newsletter. The newsletter is in the description below. That's ept.ms/Crossroads exclusive newsletter. And again, folks, also check out Epic TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. Again, link in the description below. And if you want to go the extra mile, support Crossroads, please tell a friend or family member about it. All right, folks, that said, I'll show you a quick trailer of Shen Yun Creations. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.